Joined by our friend Dovid Efune now. He is the publisher of the New York Sun, also the honorary chair of the Allgemeiner, which is a journalistic enterprise that focuses on Israel and the Middle East. Dovid, thanks for being here with us.
It's a pleasure, Buck, always to be with you. Unfortunate that it's on so tragic an occasion.
First, Dovid, can you tell us, how is it, I mean, inside of Israel, and when you're speaking to your sources about what's gone on here, the surprise attack of this scale, what are the explanations for how this could have happened and caught Israeli intelligence and security forces, which are among the best in the world, off guard in this way?
I mean, look, there's no question that there will be an investigation and a reckoning. I mean, there are so many questions that people have around the country. There's pain, but also frustration and anger. It's hard really to describe the scale of the devastation. You know, it's been compared to Israel's 9/11. But just to give you a sense on a comparative basis, you know, there are 330 million Americans. There are only 9 million Israelis. So with 800 confirmed deaths now, you know, that would be the equivalent of 30,000 Americans if an attack would have taken place of a similar scale in this country. It's you know, not just the attack itself, but, you know, the ongoing nature of it. You have hundreds of captives that were taken into Gaza, children among them, toddlers. They're being taunted in the streets. The nation of Israel, the heart of Israel, is broken and bleeding. Although I would say, you know, as the great Hasidic master, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kosk once said, there is nothing more whole than a broken heart. And what you've seen in response to this atrocity is a unification of the country in a way that we haven't seen for so long. It's a nation that is singularly focused on supporting the victims and setting about establishing a framework in which this can never happen again. And the Prime Minister has spoken very clearly. There's an operation that is due to be launched. The goal is to remove the military capacity from Hamas and to remove Hamas from control of the territory in Gaza.
So right now, thank you for coming on, Gaza is the focus. Buck and I are already talking about, according to the Wall Street Journal, Iran helped to plan this and gave the go-ahead to Hamas for this attack. Is a response to Iran also going to follow and be included in your mind, as well as what's going on right now in Gaza? And what risks and challenges does Iran's inclusion in this terror attack plan make in the larger Israeli response?
I mean, Iran is absolutely central to it. You know, certainly the Israelis have the more immediate focus of securing their border, but they know that the hand is the hand of Hamas, but the brain and the funds and the fuel are coming straight from the Ayatollahs. You know, the first book that Prime Minister Netanyahu ever wrote in the 80s, just a couple of years after his brother Yonatan was killed during the Entebbe raid in an successful effort to rescue hostages. The first book that he wrote is called Fighting Terrorism. It was, you know, really a blueprint that came to be studied by law enforcement agencies around the world of how best to counter terrorism, terrorist agencies, terrorist organizations, terrorist efforts. And one of the fundamental principles that he points to there is the danger of having territory controlled by terror groups. You know, it gives them the space, it gives them the breadth to plan and to launch attacks from. And what's happened, you know, over the years in Israel is that on 3 of Israeli borders, the Iranians have set up mini terror states. In the southwest, you have Gaza. In the north, you have southern Lebanon, where Hamas controls territory. And then on the Syrian border, there's a great deal of Iranian activity over there. So, you know, Benjamin Netanyahu knows first and foremost just how dangerous it is to allow the terrorists to control territory. But he also knows just how central the role that Iran plays is. And, I'm sure that they have their own calculations about how and when they might go about this. But certainly a message that would be heard across the region is if Israel saw this as an opportunity to target the Iranian nuclear program, which, is the crown jewel for the Ayatollah regime and also the most dangerous threat that Israel faces on the planet.
We're speaking to Dovid Efune, publisher of the New York Sun. Dovid, is it now on Netanyahu and the IDF to not just fight back and find those who are guilty of this, but to take this even further and push for effectively the dismantling and eradication of Hamas overall?
I mean, the Israelis know that there's only one way to solve this issue once and for all. I mean, since the Israeli pullout from Gaza, which I actually protested in 2005 as it was taking place on the ground, this Hamas has taken control of the Gaza Strip. That was just a couple of years later, and it has become the launch pad for one attack after the next. The Israelis know that, they can sort of conduct an operation, but they will always be living at risk of similar attacks. There's only one way to stop it once and for all, and that is really to retake control of that territory. It's been the case throughout Israel's existence that any territory that has been ceded to terror groups or even ceded to groups that aren't ostensibly terror groups have been have lost control to terror groups and have become controlled by terror groups and have become the launch pad for attacks on Israeli civilians. It's why, even though the Biden administration and some in the international community still talk about the land for peace doctrine and the two-state solution as being the only path forward, every Israeli knows that land for peace is the most dangerous equation that they might consider, and that the attacks that they faced over the last couple of days are precisely the product of that flawed thinking. So the question is how much land, how much territory Israel will need to control to be safe and to stop the flow of weapons and to know that with certainty that Gaza can no longer become the launch pad for attacks on Israeli civilians. Will it be the entire Gaza Strip? Will it be a demilitarized zone of a mile or more surrounding the Gaza Strip? Obviously, it's just the Israeli commanders and the security cabinet that are going to be discussing those details now. But I'm sure we'll see soon enough what the approach that they'll be taking is.
We know that Hamas will put their weaponry and their soldiers in places that oftentimes has civilians, sometimes children, because they like the opportunity to, one, dissuade attacks, but also, if they happen, to make it look like innocent civilians are being targeted by Israel. I would imagine, given the fact that there are hundreds of hostages that are currently in Gaza that we know were taken, that those hostages will be used in some way as human shields also. Do we have any sense for how well Israeli intelligence can have any of that information as they are making decisions about where to attack?
I mean, they'll certainly be working in overdrive, and what you're saying is exactly correct. I mean, it's the most cynical use of civilians in any war theater of war. The Israelis will certainly want to take that into consideration, and they've sort of got to balance these tricky moral questions with the bigger overall objectives and the needs to secure the Israeli South for the future and the Israeli homeland. I mean, it's not a situation that you want to be in, having to tackle these types of questions. Another thing that's never reported is that when Palestinian terrorists fire rockets out of Gaza into Israel, a very large percentage of them fall short and they land in Gaza and they kill Gazans. Remember, you don't have air raid sirens, you don't have bomb shelters in Gaza. What happens is you've got the Gaza Health Ministry, which is, really a vehicle. It's controlled by, it's a vehicle for Hamas as well. that becomes the only source of information on casualties in Gaza. And the international community starts to ask questions, and they'll count any casualty in Gaza for any reason as being one that Israel was responsible for. So all of these deaths from their own rockets that fall short, they'll blame on Israel. If God forbid a child falls off a swing in a playground and gets injured or killed as a result of that, they'll blame that on Israel. And the international community doesn't ask any questions. And not only that, they'll take these numbers at face value, and they'll take the accusation that Israel is responsible at face value. And, over a period of time, the effect that has is that the pressure starts to build on Israel. And, increasingly it's harder for Israel to take the steps and the actions it needs to take to defend its citizens and its civilians. So, certainly being able to present accurately what's taking place, to understand the steps that the Israeli military is taking to prevent civilian casualties in the most difficult climate, is crucial to ensuring, the broadest possible international support for an absolutely necessary operation, necessary not just to prevent further bloodshed in Israel, but also to prevent further bloodshed in Gaza.
Dovid, before we let you go, the concern about this becoming a broader fight, some of the other entities perhaps getting more into it, like Hezbollah and others in the immediate region, but also specifically Iran getting drawn into this more than it already is. How do you weigh that possibility?
I mean, it's certainly always a possibility. And, just to give you the scale of how the Israeli military leadership is thinking about this, they have now drafted 300,000 reservists. That's on top of regular army of 150,000. So, you're talking about a country of 9 million. So 5% of the entire country has been mobilized. And a mobilization like this is not just about Gaza. It's certainly with the understanding that there could be multiple fronts that Israel needs to be active on, and to be prepared for all possibilities and all eventualities. I spoke to a young mother in central Israel earlier today, and she told me there are no men here. It's just women and children. This is in a small town in middle Israel. Schools are all closed indefinitely. Daycare centers are all closed indefinitely. This is an entire country at war, mobilized and at war to defend its borders.
Dovid, thank you very much for giving us this update. We'll hope to talk to you again soon as this process continues.
Anytime.